All right, everybody, welcome back to the Cashflow Chronicles, episode 2 of season 3. It is September 18th, believe it or not, 2025. I'm here with Mr. Patel. Always a good time. Happy to be back for season 3. Mr. Patel, were you surprised by yesterday's moves? Do you want to jump into that, or do you want to say anything else before we get kicked off?
No, I think yesterday's moves were good. I think the market is starting to understand that we are going through a rate cutting cycle now, and that it's okay to go a little bit on the speculative side. So I saw a lot of things that were more on the spec side of things starting to get real bids. There were some news outside of that also helped markets. I mean, the Trump administration is really pushing American exceptionalism around the globe right now, and it's really interesting seeing him and all these executives over in the UK. So I was just keeping my eye on that. Outside of that, I've just been doing a lot more research on the whole BMNR thing. I actually was on Spaces earlier today discussing like what the value of BMNR is ultimately, and how the ecosystem, how the play on Ethereum leads to value generation for BMNR holders. And then, so there was like 3 layers of discussion. One, which was why be bullish on Ethereum more than Bitcoin? And then it was like, why be more bullish on BMNR than something like SBET? And then the last one was, well, what is like the ultimate like reason to be bullish on BMNR? And so it's interesting hearing everyone's perspective and figuring out like, okay, this is the main reason why we're looking at things the way that we're looking at them. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I see a lot of these people jumping into the BMNRs of the world, like you, Steve, and many others. And I just personally haven't been able to stomach as of yet. I've been in the crypto space for some time now, since 2017, 2018, where I've mined my own Ethereum back in the day. And, I've been in and out of, say, Ethereum Classic. And obviously I've been buying Bitcoin, now for about 5-6 years. So it's interesting. I see the potential appeal, but for me, I just think that and I could be burned by this, and I've seen other people come out publicly to say that they think that this time is different with respect to cryptocurrency, and that there is no cycles anymore. But to me, I just think it's a little bit late in the tooth for any sort of real big push in. I still think that there is going to be some sort of cycle. I think that while there is a rate cutting cycle that we're seeing here, that will be a tailwind for cryptocurrency. I still think in the next 12 months there will be a crypto winter, and so, or at least we'll be entering a crypto winter, at least on the other side of a peak. So for me, any large, say, additional, I'm still doing my casual 2% a month sort of buys into Bitcoin for my salary or anything like that, but I'm not dumping or making any large jumps in. I'm actually looking at what great companies are coming out there, because I still am under the belief, and maybe this works out for me, maybe it doesn't. I'll definitely eat my hat if it doesn't. But I'm looking in the next 12 to 24 months that, like, if a BMNR does say hit rock bottom, or a MicroStrategy does hit rock bottom, I'll be there to pick up the pieces when everyone else is trying to get out. And so,
yeah.
So that's where I'm kind of taking that stance on it. And in the meantime, I really hope people make a lot of money, right? I don't want anybody to, that's not saying that anybody that's buying into it, I want to do poorly or I'm betting against you. It's just for me, I think, I've seen this time and time again for a couple cycles now, and wouldn't be surprised if it plays out that way again.
Do you think it'd be a good idea to just talk about a very quick reason for like Ethereum, like what the reasoning behind the investment is? Or do you think that that's something that we should like save for another day? Because it might be a little long in the tooth to explain everything.
I think it's simple, right? I mean, in the eyes of, say, Ethereum, I think there's a lot of ability to do tokenization and write a lot of additional layering on top of Ethereum than there is on, say, Bitcoin. And so I think with that, you have the ability to do a lot more with the, say, Ethereum network than you do for say Bitcoin. And I think that that's where a lot of people are starting to see the opportunity with the tokenization of everything. And this is where I've always been bullish about blockchain as a whole. And I don't want to go down a huge rabbit hole here, but I always thought the idea of NFTs was very great, right? The thought process, not like hey, I'm going to sell this Bored Ape for $1 million. I thought that was kind of foolish, but I still think that there is some utility to an extent for some of that stuff. But it was more along the lines of, it gives the ability for brands to really show the authenticity and guarantee some of these things, right? You have the ability to always go back to the source code of whatever is being done to be able to say, okay, no, this is real. And if you have the ability to verify that, you could always say, hey, no, I'm buying this legitimate Louis Vuitton. I'm buying this legitimate Rolex. I'm buying this legitimate, and so anything and everything that has any sort of value, then you won't be duped anymore because you have the ability to potentially track it. Now, of course, I'm sure there's ways to potentially scam off of that, but at the end of the day, that's where my mind has always been for something like a blockchain or something of that nature. And I think the cryptocurrency piece it kind of legitimizes that to an extent.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I look at this, I think of this in terms of, number one, what are the major use cases going to be for Ethereum going forward? The biggest one for me right now is going to be just the utilization of stablecoins. Stablecoins can provide ways for payment processing and interchange that originally was not necessarily something that a lot of people thought about, but now it's starting to become a lot more digestible for people to understand. And then now you have this catalyst of legislative support coming from the government in both the Genius Act, the Clarity Act, and all these things. So I feel like Ethereum is having its Bitcoin moment where there was like legitimacy that eventually came to the ecosystem of Bitcoin and had MSTR because of that run really hard. I think Ethereum's in the same kind of boat right now. You've got the Treasury Secretary talking about how, the government's really trying to push for more stable coins. And then you also look at some of the fundamental changes that Ethereum went through. Like, take a look at this. Since 2022, those fundamental changes from going from proof of work to proof of stake have really caused the total supply of Ethereum to actually be very controlled. So you can see here, prior to the change, you can see it right here on the map. This is where the exact change happened with proof of work to proof of stake. So when it happened, proof of work, the total number of Ethereum in supply was about 120 million. Today, it's about 121 million, right? So not a big increase. And the mechanism by which Ethereum works right now is like twofold. You've got one side that burns itself, right? So yes, new Ethereum is issued, but then it also is getting burned. And then at the same time, you as an owner of Ethereum, if you put it with a validator, you're going to get paid gas fees for validating each of those transactions. So it's kind of like in the stock, on one hand, if you have a company that's buying back its own shares, and on the other hand, issuing you a dividend, which then you can use to reinvest back into the stock. It's a value creation like crazy, right? So BNMR is taking advantage of that right now. And I think Tom Lees understands that with the legislative support, the utilization of stable coins is going to become a much bigger piece of the ecosystem. And because it becomes a much bigger piece of the ecosystem, it means demand for those volumes is going to grow. So if you look at ETH, transaction volume, you can see on-chain volume. Look at that nice move up. See? And so, like I said, over time, this volume is just going to keep going higher and higher. And this is before all the legislative changes. So yeah. So this is, like I said, this is just a basic understanding of it. And so, like I said, as transaction volume goes up, more gas fees, more on-chain burn, the value of the Ethereum gets higher and higher. And then, of course, you've got people like Tom Lee who are just amazing at raising capital. Yeah, they're amazing at raising capital. Like, and it's funny because the spaces that I went on, Grant Cardone showed up late in it, and I was kind of relating how Ethereum has very similar, like, well, BMNR, not Ethereum, has very similar characteristics to a REIT, right? So if you think about a REIT, you have a limited amount of space, so you build property, right? It's got no value other than what people are actually going to utilize it for. So you charge people rent, right? That's the gas fees. And then you also get the benefit of scarcity, because as there's real estate there, as the number of people utilizing it grows, but the space is finite, the value of that property is going to grow higher and higher. And then if you think about it in terms of like US dollar, the dollar is inflating about 2 to 3% per year right now, right? Ethereum supply is holding steady. So every year you're getting a 3% yield on the inflation piece, like, because the value of your Ethereum is going to go higher because Ethereum is not growing nearly as much. The US dollar is growing, right? Like in total volume. And then you're getting a yield on top of it, and you're getting the burn. So it's almost like this threefold way of making money on Ethereum. And so Tom Lee, I think, recognizes that right now. And I think he's trying to front run this entire market and buy up as much as he can before this thing really starts to run. And then, then it turns into the kind of the Michael Saylor kind of situation with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I don't think it's appropriate to describe it as a REIT. Describing it as real estate is probably more appropriate. REITs issue shares to be able to get more capital than to be able to buy more real estate. So I think that's what you meant. I think you meant real estate, not REITs, right?
Well, I mean, like, the business model seems similar to that. Like, remember, a REIT issue shares so that it can get.
Oh, okay, I thought you meant you meant BMNR as like a REIT.
Right. Yeah.
BMNR. Okay, I thought you said Ethereum is like a REIT.
No,
sorry. Very good.
Yeah. So BMNR is like a REIT in that it issues shares so that this way it could buy up more real estate. And the more real estate they buy up, the more rent they collect, in which case the next level is you can use that rent to buy more real estate. Now the thing is, at some point, I think that the Tom Lee is trying to get to that 5% mark, which is about 6 million ETH. I think after that, the value is going to be in a different part. So maybe, I don't know. I don't think he's going to keep accumulating ETH after that. I think it's going to be more like stake it. I saw the presentation that he put out there, and it was about creating like an America validator node that basically, because you have such big scale, you're able to actually get more yield from it. So like I said, a lot of this stuff still learning, but the one thing I can tell all you guys when I was at Robinhood Summit, everyone was bullish on BMNMR. That's how I got converted. I had a lot of conversation with people, and they were just really like putting BMNR into the ether. And I was like, you know what? I'll figure it out once I get in. I've always made that mistake in the past where I've been a little too analytical, waiting for like, oh yeah, let me make sure X, Y, and Z. And I've missed out on some amazing run-ups because of that. So,
well, it's interesting because it's, I know in the past you've been somewhat cold against cryptocurrencies. So it's interesting to see kind of I don't want to say maturing, because you've always had a very mature look at things, but as you've learned, right, your opinions have changed. And so I think that's something I think that people should acknowledge and admire, is like, when you learn something, you don't always know what you don't know, right? So when you learn something, you can always kind of shift your mind, and depending on what's right for you at the moment, you can have differences of opinions, right? Something might be right for you in the moment, something might not be. And to be very honest, I think it's a very interesting topic to kind of state, is that you didn't need cryptocurrency in the past, and look how successful you still are, right? And so, I want people to acknowledge that, right? Like, you don't always have to be following everything all the time, but
I think
always
it's easier.
Always be learning, I think, is an important thing to say.
I think this one is easier for me to get behind because I can see the actual like value of it, other than just the next guy will pay it. Like, I see the use case, I see the utility of it, which is much easier for someone like me to understand and digest, versus Bitcoin, which is a little bit still what is the value of Bitcoin? Well, the next guy will pay higher for Bitcoin than I bought it for. That's the thing with Bitcoin. It's like the value of Bitcoin is derived from that. With Ethereum, it's that plus there's actually use cases. That's the thing I like about it.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing for Bitcoin for me is, and you showed a little bit, is that there's no inflation. So it is kind of a hedge to an extent against the dollar. It was actually pretty funny. My buddy was complaining. He was very hungry on his drive back. It's the person I co-own a home with in New Jersey. We're installing a pool, and we were just talking a little bit about some of the updates that we're doing. And I'm going to be there next week, and we're going to do some more updates to the house. And so we're just talking through some stuff, and he was like, dude, I'm really hungry. And, I was grabbing some chicken on the way home. And he was like, you know what I'll never forget they took away from us? Dollar McChickens from McDonald's. And so we were just like shooting the shit. And I promise this has a story, right? This has a meaning, right? I'm not just talking, because of, I'm a fatty. But I was just like, dude, like he just told me, and I didn't realize this because I don't really get McChickens anymore. He was like, did you know a McChicken is like $3.49? To which blew my fucking mind, right? Because to me, they're still like, I don't know, $2 or something, because I don't really get them anymore. And I was like, dude, there's no way. So I go online, and of course, 2024 to 2014. And inflation during that time was anywhere estimated between 30 to 50%, right? Obviously, some people say more or less, etc. So during that time, 30 to 50% cumulatively, and McDonald's prices, depending on what item, anywhere between like 50, which was the lowest, which is at that point pretty much dollar for dollar increase comparatively to inflation. And I think that was for like the soda or something like that. So they didn't really raise prices on soda; they just kept up with inflation, all the way to the McChicken being the worst. And I think it was like a 200% increase or something absolutely absurd. And so I was like, wow, really think about that. Like, I didn't really realize. Like, and he was like, dude, how could you not realize? Never forget they took the dollar menu away from us. Like, how could they? Like, anyway, I just thought it was pretty funny. But it just goes to show you the reason why, personally, for me, I'm kind of personally wanting to get behind real estate and Bitcoin and things that have some sort of scarcity, because the dollar always goes down in value. And so to have something that at least retains its value to an extent, or at least, will always be a hedge against the dollar. Yes, there might be fluctuations on an annual basis, but over the long term, 10, 15-year period, generally speaking, you'll be able to hedge against inflation. That's why I like something like a Bitcoin, real estate, etc. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, let's watch a real clip. Like, I think this is one of the things that really radicalized me outside of just talking to people. And I kind of alluded to this on Amit's stream at one time. I was like, look, I think Ethereum's got some legs. I just didn't realize the mechanism that I would probably take exposure to this. But this is the underlying clip that really did it for me. So let's just watch it real quick.
A book called King Dollar. A journalist who's followed Treasury for about 40 years.
Yeah.
And he talks about every time there was a narrative that the US was going to lose reserve currency status, why it's never happened. And
because crypto, that seems to be a threat to the dollar, doesn't it?
I think it's the opposite.
Oh, really?
I think stable coins could reinforce dollar supremacy, because with stable coins could end up being one of the largest buyers of US treasuries or T-bills. So all of a sudden, if you are using a stable coin in Nigeria that's backed by the US dollar, you don't actually have to have dollars. It's on your phone. You can transact. So I think there's a very good chance that crypto is actually one of the things that locks in dollar supremacy.
And is that why it was crucial that Donald Trump get involved in crypto rather than trying to constrain it like Joe Biden was?
I think constrain's too mild a word. I think make it extinct.
Oh.
So this administration's commitment to digital assets, it's innovation, because there's so many other things that happen around digital assets. And also, it's one of those things that it's one of the most important phenomena that's happening in the world. and the U.S. just ignored it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something I realized, like going back, and I mean, I know he was talking specifically around kind of more like Ethereum and stable coins and stuff of the like, but that's what kind of opened my eyes to cryptocurrency, because when I was living in Trinidad and Tobago, and I've said this story a bunch of times, so apologies for the people that this is like, repetition, but I didn't really understand, right? Like I'm so used to having the US dollar, which is the global currency, as you just heard Scott was say. It's like, for me, it was always just like, I can go anywhere and, I could go to Turks and Caicos, give them $1. I can go to Mexico, give them $1. I can go to a lot of places and they'll accept $1, even though it's not even their currency. But if I went to a very funny story. So I had a high school reunion. I forget what it was, like 10 year, 15 year. I don't remember. But I had some Trinidad dollars on me and I tried giving them to the bartender as like a joke. He's like, don't even give that to me. I don't even what the fuck am I going to do with that? You know what I mean? So it's like, I can completely understand why somebody would want a Bitcoin, because there's no boundary, or Ethereum, because there's no boundary associated with it. You could potentially use it anywhere. So anyway.
Yeah. No, it's like I said, it's very interesting. And the thing is, now there's a lot of institutional support behind this thing now. So it's no longer just, hey, is this just, a bunch of crypto bros talking about it and, using it to trade monkey pictures, right? Like that was the whole thing with crypto 1.0, like especially Ethereum 1.0, where people were saying, oh, well, this is the future. I think now you're starting to see like actual companies. Like I was trying to find one right now from Visa. Visa did this great, what is it called? Like a map of how tokenization is going to happen within their ecosystem and how they're planning on using it. Just have to find it real quick. But yeah, it's a very interesting, here, I think I found it. Give me 1 second. Take a look at this. There we go. Right here. So these are the multiple use cases that Visa outlined for crypto, for settlements, for different things, like from bank to bank, from business to business. So you can see here, like Visa's solution, how it would basically be the main guy up there, and they would use crypto to do all the basically the orchestration of things, right? And like I said, it's instantaneous transfers. There's so many benefits to it that help these guys. So it's like I said, you really have to go through it. But once you get through it, it's like, wow, like wait a second, this thing isn't just like I said, it's not the crypto bro kind of thing. There's actually real money behind it now. There's real institutional support behind it. And like I said, I think Tom Lee recognizes it. And because he recognizes it, he's doing as much as he can to accumulate the premium to MNAV that what's his name, that BMNMR is getting, is actually another reason to be bullish, because they can issue more shares and buy up as much of this real estate very early in this, while the regulatory framework is being worked out. I don't know if you've been watching the news, but Brian Armstrong and these guys, they were all in Congress this week. Did you see that?
No, I've been unfortunately working pretty late nights at the office, so unfortunately haven't really been keeping up too much with the markets as much as I'd like to.
Yeah, no. So this week, for their what is that thing called? Coinbase, the CEO of Coinbase, Tom Lee, all of these guys were in DC this week, talking with legislators and lawmakers about this specific thing. So let me see if I can find it.
I mean, what specific importance does it have?
So there are still some acts that are coming out right now from a legislative standpoint that if they get worked out, they make, like this thing right here. I found it. Sorry. Let me just play it one time real quick. Sorry. Sometimes it's easier for me to just play the clip than me trying to actually explain it. So let me just bring it right here. All right. Here we go.
Financial Services Committee Chairman French Hill is calling for crypto market structure legislation to be passed into law before the U.S. loses ground to Latin America and Europe. Chairman Hill joins us this morning. Mr. Chairman, it's good to see you. And I would ask you, what what do you asking for? But all you got to say is you're asking for what's in that bill that the Senate is sitting on, right? There's a bill ready to go that would accomplish what you're asking for.
You bet, Joe. Good morning. Great to be with you. Happy 30th anniversary to the squawk.
Thank you.
Glad to be on. Exactly right. We passed in the House in July the Clarity Act, which got 78 Democratic votes, meaning we had a strong bipartisan vote over the suspension of vote level in the House, meaning more than 290 members came together to vote for the Clarity Act, which is that market framework which will make America the most competitive digital asset nation in the world. When you combine it with the Genius Act that President Trump signed into law in July, which is the dollar-backed payment stablecoin legislation.
And you are somewhat gratified with what the Trump administration has done. There's been some progress, obviously, with the Genius Act, but what I didn't realize was how more advanced, is that the right word, for crypto use in the economy is in South America. And maybe even in Europe, in terms of legislation, where we're definitely ahead with liquidity, and we've had some good IPOs, but we're lagging without this structure in place.
That's right. We can't be competitive and lead the nation in fintech if we don't have this market framework. I told President Trump back in July that if you sign the Genius Act and you pass it, it's like passing a bill that authorizes the use of a cell phone, but you have no cell towers. You don't have the rules for custody, for dealing, for exchanging, for serving as a trader, for how you're going to actually operate a blockchain network inside the financial services industry. So we need both. They're both essential. And as you point out, the Senate is now considering the Clarity Act under Tim Scott's leadership in the Banking Committee and John Bozeman's leadership in the House of the Senate Ag Committee. And we hope that they will take prompt action on that this fall during the October and November timeframe. I'd love to see the Clarity Act pass the Senate before the end of the year.
Why is it? What's the problem? Who would bring it up and vote? Is that John Thune?
Is what this guy's saying even any different than what Scott Bessent was saying, or is this pretty much the same thing?
No, this is there's some big differences here compared to what Scott Bessent was saying. Scott Bessent is saying, look, we need to lean into crypto if we want to maintain dollar supremacy. Now, the gentleman here, we got that through the Genius Act. Now the thing is, there's legislative framework on how this industry is going to get regulated, right? So one of the things that happens, like let's say you operate a bank. If the government says, yeah, I think crypto is a good idea, you're like, okay, great. I'll do stuff with crypto. But
yeah, but wasn't that all kicked off by the Genius Act? I mean, so isn't this just a follow through with the Genius Act?
So the Genius Act pretty much just legitimized cryptocurrency. Now,
so this is a follow through of the Genius Act,
right? So this is like putting the frameworks together. So this is like putting the frameworks together as like things like who's the ultimate legislator for to make sure that there are no bad actors in crypto. Like who's gonna regulate that? Is it gonna be the local Texas PD where you live? If let's say someone is trying to defraud someone in the ecosystem, or is it going to be the FBI, or is it going to be the SEC, right? So you need to make sure that you have the proper framework together so that the rules are there. And once you have the rules together, the institutions say, okay, now that we know what the rules are, we can actually adopt this thing.
Okay, I'm over this topic.
I got you.
Yeah, sorry. It's just to me, it's very similar, right? I just don't want to continue to dive deep, and I didn't want to make this a crypto episode. So, the thing that I always thought was pretty interesting that I wanted to kind of highlight, and curious to get back to the FOMC piece, and kind of really think about specifically, what that means, particularly for what that might mean to the markets, and where we can kind of potentially prepare going into 2026, or what you're potentially doing. But before then, I thought this was interesting. This is something that I've always kind of been concerned about, specifically around why we just continue to add more and more and more in terms of liabilities to the Fed balance sheet. and I think people probably remember this was obviously the big spike up because of the pandemic and lending out money, and then we continued to just lend out money because of the pandemic, and then we started to actually sell off and taper, not sell off, but taper our kind of purchases eventually, and then we had this big spike up because of the, believe it or not, almost it was March 2022. Really, it's pretty crazy. The Silicon Valley Bank, and the quick run on everything that was going on then. I can't believe that was in 2022. It seemed like, was that 2022?
Was it 2022 or 2023? It was 2023.
Sorry, it's 2023. Sorry, yeah. I can't believe it was over 2 years ago. Okay, wow. Yeah. But anyway, I just thought it was pretty interesting that we're almost back to where we were kind of at the start of the pandemic timeframe, and curious to see what ends up happening. Like, are we going to continue to get back? If people aren't necessarily familiar, before we were probably hanging around in the middle before we started quantitative easing in the 2018 timeframe, when markets really started freaking out. Back then, we were at about 4.5 trillion. So we've obviously come down from about 9 trillion to about 6.5 or so, which I thought more craziness was going to happen because of that. And to be very frank, I think we've honestly done a pretty good job of being able to kind of taper off, and surprised that we only had this one small blip with respect to like Silicon Valley Bank and some of these other small regional banks. But other than that, which it still was big, right? I mean, comparatively to what happened with the financial crisis, I mean, it was pretty big even compared to that. But it ended up being fine, and we were able to work through that, and overall still continue to taper off. But I don't know. I'm not necessarily directly connected, but I was just surprised that we've been able to kind of forego all this tapering and actually do rather okay. But back to the FOMC piece, what are your thoughts with respect to the 25? Were you expecting 50?
No, I think 25 is measured. I think if they did 50, that might be a little bit too much, and they actually could have signal to the markets that things are not as good. So in the short to medium term, we might have got like a rally, but long term, it would have signaled to the markets that, hey, there's something fundamentally wrong with the economy, and the government needs to come in. I mean, most of the time when you've seen governments or cutting interest rates, it's primarily because there's some underlying structural issues in the economy that calls for that additional liquidity. Right. So the best example, the way I can kind of frame it is, if everything is doing good, unemployment is good, like inflation is low, you don't really need to like move policy rates up or down. This time around, this cutting thing, it was like, well, rates are too high. And one of the justifications that like the administration kept kind of pushing the Federal Reserve is that, look, unemployment is starting to rise. The job market is not as healthy as it had looked before. Inflation, while not at the 2% target, is under control. So, I think the Fed eventually kind of got convinced that some of the early data that they got around unemployment, where you kind of want to start the cutting process a little sooner, so that this way you get a little bit more confidence back into the market. Now, if you do too much, like I said, it scares the shit out of people. And that's also another thing. Businesses, it's hard for them to digest sudden changes to interest rates without having some kind of tectonic shift in how they operate as businesses. So, that's where I think that.
So let me pull up Webull just so we can kind of look at what happened, because I think initially when we cut 25 basis points, the market acted very favorably. I think everything was starting to go in the right direction. And then I think when JP started talking, he started saying some rhetoric where I think a lot of people started getting spooked. And I think he strengthened his position, where before he was saying, why is this going this way? Before he used to be saying, things along the lines of, where is this? Where do I get the SPY? There we go. Chart. Let me share my screen. Talking specifically more around the, let me go to the 30-minute, maybe the 5-minute. Specifically, he was very much around focusing on the around 2% or even 2.5% seemed like it would be okay for inflation. And it seemed like he started sticking back to his guns about almost 2% means 2% again. So I think initially, once we heard the rate cut, we started seeing this spike up, right? And then that's the market started acting extremely favorably. And then towards the end of the day, we started seeing this volatility and spike down towards end of day. Keep in mind, I'm an hour behind, so 1500 is 4 o'clock Eastern time for normal folk on the eastern seaboard. So really, everything kind of sold off in that respect, and then obviously the markets opened up higher again today with the news. But do you think that is something that should be worrisome? Do you think 2% really means 2%, or do you think that was just a misspeak and he still means what he was talking about for the past several months, around 2%, and we really shouldn't be hunkering too much on his words, like how we see those memes about when he says good afternoon and you see the guys go pale face white, you know?
I think they're in a really tough spot because on one hand, in my opinion, the environment for disinflation is very, very much alive. But on the other hand, some of the policy decisions that the administration's making in the short term might actually cause a rise in inflation, like putting tariffs on a lot of trading partners. And, you know, all of those things are going to get factored into the eventual inflation on goods. Right. And then you have these deportations, like all these people getting deported. That means that now you have less workers, which means that now businesses have to kind of hire people at higher rates, you know, like at a higher wage. So all of those costs get factored in as well. So, you know, I think eventually aggregate demand kind of settles down, in which case it kind of neutralizes everything. But the Fed has to kind of just take a look at the data that they're getting and act upon that. So on one hand, they see inflation reaccelerating, and on the other hand, they also see jobs, you know, going the other direction. So they're in a really bad place. They're like, okay, which one do we kind of save? Do we keep at it and try to control inflation, or do we let unemployment start to rise, and then now all of a sudden, you know, you've got yourself a stagflationary environment? So I would not want to be Jerome Powell right now, trying to make a decision on which one to go.
I don't want to get too political, so let's not get too political there. And I'm not saying you were, right? But the statement I'm going to say is borderline. So I'm very curious on your thoughts on this. So with the deportation piece, in unemployment going up, do you think that deportation, because some of these individuals that have been, you know, in the country have been given jobs and licenses and things of the like, so they have been able to work to an extent. Do you think that with deportation with some of these individuals that will help unemployment to an extent, and that's actually potentially going to be bullish in that realm, right? And specifically for unemployment, right? And I don't want to get into the politics of, you know, the deportation and everything like that, but specifically around the unemployment piece.
So, you know, it kind of depends. So one of the things that people think, like on face value, they'll say, well, there's 20 million illegal immigrants, we should just deport them all, right? And people will be like, yeah, that means that there's 20 million new jobs that have just been created. Like everything's going to be great. And then when you take a step back, you realize, like, wait a second, like that's 20 million people less that need haircuts. That's 20 million people less going to restaurants. That's 20 million people less that are going to be eating food, right? Which means that there's less demand for food. That's 20 million people less that need, you know, additional services. And if you don't have that population there to serve, that means that even from a government side, you don't need as many people. Like if you go to like New York State and you go to some of the schools up in like outside of New York City, dude, they're shrinking populations. So when you have a shrinking population, right, what are you going to do then? So the thing is, immigration has this ability to create vitality. And so if you look at like what Ronald Reagan and a lot of the Republicans from back in the day, they said, you know, they were always pro-immigration for that reason, that it helps America grow. The challenge is you don't want to do it to the extent where you're allowing a lot of people at the same exact time, in which case now you're putting strain on resources on the country, right? So immigration can be a really good thing as long as it's controlled immigration. It provides a subset of labor. And the other thing is, if you think about it just from like a productive, like economic productive, like cost perspective, you have a fully formed human crossing the border and now ready to go to work, versus if you have someone who's born here, you got to raise them. You have to spend, like, the government has to spend $1 million just to get you from age 0 to 18 to working age, right? This other person is just coming in and saying, look, they were already kind of made in Mexico and, other parts of the world, and they came here and they're ready to work. Now, the thing is, not every job requires like a higher education. Some jobs just require fundamental, like what is that thing called? Like roofers, right? The thing is, like, now you're spending $1 million to basically create a productive citizen, and then you're going to extract that value over the next 40, 50 years, right? If you have an immigrant that comes in and they start working right away in an industry like that, you'd paid zero. So from a productivity standpoint, you basically got someone who's providing labor. And the thing is that labor now translates to other things. So a lot of people here in the US, the idea, and this is just a basic theory, was, well, if we allow for immigrants to come in and do the jobs that quote unquote Americans don't want to do, that means that the Americans that are here legally, they're able to free up themselves and go into higher productive jobs, right? Or at least that's like the theory behind like unlimited immigration proponents. But what tends to happen is you also undercut wages as well from people at the bottom level. So if you're just, let's say, a high school grad and you're not trying to go into any advanced sciences or any degrees like that, and you just want to, do a very, blue collar job, you don't want to compete against someone who's just coming in and who's willing to work for half the price that you do, So it's a combination of just economic theory, right and left. And immigrants also tend to be a little bit more entrepreneurial as well. I mean, it's a proven fact. You look at all these businesses here in the US, a lot of them have founders that are from an immigrant background, first generation, second generation. So a lot of the thought process around immigration is that if we take this subset of the population out and we don't allow for a good amount of immigration to come in, we're just screwing ourselves in the future. In the short term, it's going to feel great. It's going to be like, yay, look, everyone's going to get a job. And it's like, okay, but now those same people that could have been doing something more productive are now going to be doing something less productive, So
no, those are good points. Some of those things I never really thought about. I never really thought of it from the lens of, because I've seen it a lot from the Uber perspective. A lot of the Uber drivers I've gotten recently, and this is just a bias piece, right? I only see one lens of it, have been mostly Spanish speaking. And so most of the time they were at least bilingual in the past, but more recently. And so maybe that's just the luck of the draw. Maybe they aren't, illegals or anything like that. Maybe they've been here for quite some time and they just were always growing up with speaking Spanish and just never, there's communities in Houston that, only speak Spanish and that's fine as well. And so, but I had an interesting conversation with multiple Uber drivers at this point, specifically talking about this particular topic, where their jobs have been really hindered and their fares have been really hindered based off of this. The fact that people are getting licenses and it's more competitive. And so that Uber is taking advantage of that and driving down how much they're able to give their drivers because of that. And I never really thought about it, but you brought up a phenomenal point with respect to that's 20 million less people you have to give haircuts, feed, etc., which also drives the economy. And I never really thought about it from that lens, which I think is a really good way to kind of think about it as well. I think about the issue of, say, co-living, like with say having a large amount and an influx of people, which I am pro-immigration as well, just to kind of put it out there, and I don't want to be political about it, but I am a product of immigration. Obviously, my dad's dad came in the late 1800s. My mom's dad came in the late 1800s over, and then my dad's mom, came over from Germany in the 1950s. So Obviously, I wouldn't be around if it wasn't for immigration to the U.S. So, but I'm with you. It has to be done in an appropriate manner, and there has to be wireframes to make it not make it fall apart. Because otherwise, like you said, I mean, things just get out of control, unfortunately.
The other things, and this is the unpopular truth that we all have to accept, there are certain areas of the world, it's fine to take people in from them, but you don't do it in mass, and you don't let them congregate in one specific area, because then what happens is they end up creating a colony of bad ideas, right? And that colony of bad ideas can grow. And that colony of bad ideas can sort of subsume the great ideas of this country, right? And the thing is, people feel like they never have to assimilate. They never have to adopt the traditions and qualities and cultures of this country. And that's something I hate. And I'm an immigrant. So like sometimes I'll go to certain parts of New York, like when I was still there, and I was just like, I see nothing but Indian people in that one area, right? And I love Indian people. I am Indian, but there are certain aspects of our culture which are not great. Like the caste system and things like that. So if you allow for a lot of people to basically get into the country and you never allow for this assimilation, like natural assimilation to occur, you create yourself insular colonies in the country, and that causes a lot of tension. And a lot of those things can boil over into, mass hysteria and all this other thing. So, we have to accept that some cultures are just backward and they need about, I'd say 500 years of pulling them forward in the cultural evolution of things. I'm not saying every culture is backward, but there are cultures out there that are completely toxic. In my opinion, when I see them, I'm just like, thank God I wasn't born in that country. Thank God I never had to grow up under that belief system, because that kills human innovation, kills spirit, has no freedom for women, takes like I said, and anyone here, you can infer which parts of the world that is. And I've been to some of those parts of the world, nor I could never see myself living there, nor could I ever see that becoming the de facto culture that should be present in the future. But if you allow enough people from those regions to come in and then subsume your culture, then you kind of fall under their standards of morality, their standards of ethics. And trust me, it's like our level of moral and ethics is here. Theirs is like here.
Yeah,
it is so.
Well, let's move on. It seems it's getting more political, and that's what I wanted to avoid. So, I mean, I think a lot of people know where I stand, but I just don't want to, offend anybody. I just, this is a stock talk show, and about companies and finances. I appreciate you sharing your opinions, but at the same time, I don't want to upset anybody.
Yeah. No, let me just add one thing, because there's a comment. Tomcat says, "How is the caste system going to affect American society? Makes no sense." No, the caste system is one of those things that says that you were born into your specific role. And the thing is, some people from the old country, they come here and they think they can still impose that caste system. Like, I'll give you an example. My parents, before I was like, I'd say 28, they would have preferred if I married a girl that was of my specific background, right? And if I tried to like find someone else who was, of a higher caste, they'd say, or a lower caste, they'd be like, no, like you shouldn't be around that person. They wouldn't be compatible with us. And I sort of thought that was normal until I grew up here. And I said, you know what? I'm not doing that. And I'm going to marry the girl I love. And the girl I love right now is from a different caste. But the thing is, if that was the default thinking, then you would end up literally in that kind of thing. So if there's enough people that have those same thought patterns, then you're just reinforcing a system like that among that small community that comes in. But then as that community grows bigger and bigger, they're going to bring in those bad ideas, and those ideas are going to become entrenched into the society and the culture. And I don't think it's worth it to have that. So
I'm with you. Understood. Yeah, unfortunately, This is not that type of show, but yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm sure when your parents met Beep Beep, they were like, she a baddie, and they were all for it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm curious. I mean, the thought process around half a basis point cut going further into the latter half of the year, I mean, that's bullish for real estate to an extent where people can refinance. So at least it eases up the collar a little bit, right? There's obviously been choking up, and a lot of people haven't been buying, which you've seen a lot of price cuts nationwide. Do you think that that's enough to potentially stop the bleeding? The thing that I was, and then I'll follow up that with a second question. They only talked about, was it half a point for all of 2026, or was it a quarter point for all of 2026? And then I think it was only a quarter point as well for 2027. So it doesn't look like we're getting too much further. It's only a point and a half, I think, altogether, or maybe a 1.75 points, 175 points between now and the end of 2027. So altogether, not too much. Or do you think that that's the kind of the 3.5, 3.25% range on the FFR is probably about where we should be?
I think it's fine where we are. I mean, the economy is doing well, man. We don't need to go crazy with these things. The federal funds rate, if it stays at 3%, I think it's tolerable. You know, like we've gotten so used to 0%, which is not normal. Like
Yo-yo
in the history of-
almost. It's like it goes up,
Yeah.
and then something bad happens, we cut it. Something goes up, it goes
Yeah.
down, we cut it. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like we need to learn how to live with at least a little bit of cost when it comes to cost of capital. And businesses have to evolve. And I think businesses they're getting used to paying a little bit more for the capital, right? It's one thing if you're going into a deep recession because of something like the 2008 financial crisis, where you kind of have to stimulate the economy, but the economy is doing good. You know, you don't have to get back to 0% interest rates. Yeah, phone is close up. I think that's the challenge, right? Look at that sudden rise in 2005 all the way to 2008 when inflation was starting to rise, and then all of a sudden damn thing crashed to near zero and stayed there for the next 7 years. And then they started to rise again, and then now it's back to crashing again, and it's back up again, and it's gonna when is this shit gonna end? You know, just try to stabilize it, keep it within a decent level. And every time every time we try to re-engineer the economy like this, it leads to these cycles. I mean, it's good for investors because when these cycles come, as long as you pick things up at the bottom of the cycle and you capitalize on the upward move, you're going to do really well. So, yeah.
So is there a way that you're positioning yourself between now and the end of 2027, knowing that's going to be an interest rate cutting environment? Obviously, it was not smart to be investing in certain real estate opportunities. Some were great opportunities, right? Because it got smacked too much, right? Like SLG, perfect example, right? It got smacked way too hard. And then to rebound from that when everybody realized, oh, this shit's not going to zero, obviously rebounded and actually did a great opportunity to buy in. But a lot of real estate investment trusts have been stagnant since interest rates have been so high since 2022. Is now a good time to potentially be looking at real estate investment trusts, or you think it's still going to be too high, too cost prohibitive for them to really be making money in the short term, and it's still time to stay away? Are you really even looking at that sort of thing, or you're just focused right now on your crypto stuff?
I think right now I'm looking at rotation, right? Where this is just being me. When I look at the market, I see valuations on some of the key sectors that are just way in excess. And so when I see that kind of frothiness, it leads me to believe hey, you know what? It might not be a bad idea to just take some defensive measures in the portfolio, be a little bit more defensive. So as an example, I'll give you the things that I think are screaming, hey, we're in exuberance mode. So number one, look at Oklo, Oklo and the nuclear thing, zero revenue, all based on ideas. It's went from $6 a year ago to now $100, right? You've got the same thing with what is that thing called, with a whole bunch of other like companies, like this Open Door thing. Open Door is gating all these bids, and I'm like, look, the business model is broken. The company doesn't make money, but we're in speculation mode, so everyone's just throwing money at the sector. So I'm just seeing rampant speculation, and so when there's rampant speculation, I tend to just say, you know what, let's be a little bit more defensive. So I'm looking at sold off sectors that have powers to resist a recession, and just seeing like, okay, is there value here that we can attain without having to take on too much risk? And then there's also like, hey, I'm still going to remain in the market because the rate cutting environment is going to definitely help, small caps especially. And I think Tom Lee actually brought that up as well. So the example that I would give you is a good example is, let's say, Norwegian Cruise Lines, right? Now, what does rate cutting have to really do with Norwegian? Like, what's the relation here? And let me actually, while you want to talk about this, I'll bring it up and we can kind of mention it. So,
and I do have to wrap it up here in probably the next 5-10 minutes. So,
oh yeah, okay. So yeah, like a lot of businesses, their margins depending on the cost to borrow. So if you lower the cost to borrow, you're basically increasing profits. If you increase profits, you're increasing EPS. EPS goes up, the stock price goes up. Simple as that, right? So, yeah.
So is there any particular ones that you're looking at, or you're still just you're pondering, poking around?
I'm pondering, poking, and just doing analysis on debt for a lot of companies. Like a lot of companies, they're still beaten down because their debt has been primarily an adjustable rate. So if you have adjustable rate and that SOFR is now going in the other direction, that means that the value of the assets, one, will go up, but two, the cost of borrowing will go down. So as an example, there's some REITs out there who basically borrowed money during COVID at very low rates. And then all of a sudden now they're in the process of refinancing, and their stocks took an absolute dumpster dive because
like PW and a few others.
Yeah. So they took a dumpster dive because the cost to borrow would be so much more for them. But now with rates coming down, or at least getting cuts, that means that, they'll be able to borrow that next cycle of cash at a cheaper price. And if they're able to do that, that means that the value of those REITs go up. And REITs and income properties have another benefit, that as you lower the Fed funds rate, that means that the money that you just put in the bank that you're getting on money market goes down, which means people are going to be yield starved, right? So if you're right now used to getting 6%, 7% on a fixed income product, and all of a sudden, and that's more guaranteed, if you take away those yields, now all of a sudden people are going to be gravitating things that can deliver additional yield for you. So as an example, if you're getting 4% on money market or 4.5% on money market, what do you care? You don't want to take risk. You're not going to buy a preferred equity. But if the bank says, you know what, I'm cutting your interest payments by half, and I'm only going to give you 1% or 2%, you're like, wait a second, I can't live off of 1% or 2%. I need to go get me some yield. So you're going to go buy a Verizon. You're going to go buy a TFC. You're going to go buy a REIT that's paying more, So a lot of that money is going to flow into those things. So yeah, that's where I'm looking.
Interesting. Yeah, I've always thought about that which I've seen a little bit of, and I think a lot of companies have navigated themselves out of it. But a lot of companies took on debt, like you stated, at zero interest rate policies, through 2010 to 2018 timeframe, just because they could. Apple being one of them, but Apple at least has the cash flow to pay it back. But there are companies out there that are almost like zombie companies that took it on just because they could. And now they're refinancing, but they've invested all that money, but they didn't make enough return to actually be able to stockpile. And so they're actually in a shit ton of trouble for a lot of these companies that have, high debt to EBITDAs that haven't been focusing on it. And so those are the companies that I'm really like looking at potentially, how are they doing? Are they going to go on asset sales? Because I think those are the ones that will potentially do very poorly. There's been a lot of great oil and gas companies that have been really shoring up their finance sheets. But the ones that have not been, I think are potentially good opportunities to look at, say in 10 years time. In a few months' time, if oil prices take a shit or anything like that, where there is a recession, because they'll be the ones that are still trying to refinance debt. And, it hasn't been long enough where some of these things have come due where they actually have to recycle and get at, say, instead of the 3-4% interest rates, now they're at, things are being written out at 8-9%, and especially even more depending on what type of credit rating you have. So I've started to see some shit hit the fan with some small oil companies. And so I think you're going to continue to see, especially if oil prices stay at the $60 range, I think you're going to continue to see some more small players, as we've already started to see over the past 10 years. A lot of small oil players really exit the market because, it's no longer from 2000 to 2014 where, anybody and their mom could drill a hole in the ground and make a shit ton of money, where oil went from $10 a barrel to $100 a barrel. And contracting and stuff was cheap. Now contracting and stuff is expensive. So you gotta pay the man. So interesting. Any final thoughts with respect to other stuff? I'm trying to think. I mean, for me, I think people, to give a different lens, I was talking about this the other day. I think Amit had somebody that does real estate on his show the other day. And for people that may or may not know, originally I was planning on doing a lot more moving because I work in oil and gas, and, just never ended up working out. And so originally I was going to, really not plan on doing a lot of real estate. So once I kind of moved back to the States in 2020, I was like, you know what, if I'm going to be staying here, I might actually start a real estate portfolio. And that's when I actually kind of started to potentially buy. So I've really bought, 4 properties or so over the past, I guess 4 years. So 2022, 2023, 2024. Now, I guess I bought one in early 2025 as well. But because of the interest rate environment, all of those are, either around or north of 7%. And so hopefully for me, I'll be able to potentially refinance some of those things. And with that, having a large amount of real estate altogether, you think about it, cutting that, depending on what my equity position is on all those mortgages, it could be, 5 figures in terms of interest savings a year that I could directly put back into my pocket, or, put into the properties, which actually would be nice to be able to reinvest some of that money. And so that's really what I'm hoping to do. It's nice to see them come down to 6. I might be getting greedy. I got greedy in April when things got down to the 5.75% range, and I wish I took advantage of it back then. So I don't know. Part of me is hoping that there's some sort of small recession that doesn't impact me too much. So that way, we do cut interest rates maybe down to something in the low 3s, and then I'm able to refinance at 4.5% or something like that for a lot of these properties. Because then I'd be able to, cash flow a shit ton on some of them. But they all cash flow now, so it'd be nice to be able to refinance them. And even though it'll be a short-term sort of headwind, because obviously you have to come out of pocket a little bit for some of them, in the medium term, it's a good thing because, like I said, it'll help with cash flow in more of the 1 to 2 years down the road sort of time frame. So I'm excited for that path, specifically this house, because if I refinance this house, I've been throwing a little bit extra money. I'll actually be able to generate some pretty decent rental income if I actually do move. But keep in mind as well, if I do end up moving back to the Northeast, I probably would end up selling this house, because really the only thing that keeps me here is my job. So, yeah. Any last thoughts, Mr. Bill? What about your job? Or not your job, your house?
You're muted. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, me and the wife are looking for a house. We find something good, we're gonna buy, and we're pretty settled. I think Atlanta is where we're gonna end up. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna the goal now is just travel more, spend more time with the wife. I told her, after February, if she wants to go per diem, part time, whatever. Dude, I want to spend more time with my wife. The first 5 years of our marriage, I was constantly flying back and forth between New York and Atlanta, and that was not good. And then COVID, of course, was there. So Yeah, I just, I've worked really hard. The wife's really worked really hard. I had a great time in Iceland with her. And so I think the goal now for me is just spend more time with the wife. And I work overnight, and I think eventually I'm going to quit that. And so this way we can have like a normal 9 to 5, where in the morning time, we get to have breakfast together. We actually get to go to our jobs, and then she comes home, we're going to have dinner together. So, and watch a movie. Like we were watching Squid Games, and she ruined it for me. Thanks a lot, honey. I know you're watching the stream. She told me who dies, and then she tried to backtrack. Like, oh, no, she actually wins. I was like, you just like, I've been really good about not like just going and saying like who's good, what's gonna happen, because sometimes I have a bad habit to doing that. But she blurted it out. So now
I've been really good. I've been doing that with F1. So like nobody's like been spoiling. Luckily, F1 is still like not super popular. So anytime somebody starts talking F1, I'm like, I'm still behind. I'm only on España. Don't like, you know what I mean? Like, don't ruin it for me. So I'm like, I'm probably like 8 races behind. I need to catch up. But
yeah.
Anyway.
Someone's like, why not retire? I'm 40, man. What am I gonna do? Like, it's one thing to retire, but what are you gonna do all day? I don't know. I've always had a job. I've been working since I was like 14, 15 years old. Actually, no, yeah, around 14 years old. Like, I could never see myself not have a job.
Yeah, I was talking to my buddy about that earlier. I was just like, I would just probably try to start up random small low risk businesses. Like,
yeah.
And like I was telling my buddy, I was just like, I've always wanted to kind of try the making houses nicer, like flipping thing. And as long as like I'm not getting in too deep, and I have enough cash flow where I can like sustain the mortgage and everything like that, I'd be like, yeah, I'd probably do that and pay some contractors and, do all that and kind of make them nice and flip them. And that would kind of keep me occupied, and I wouldn't really do it to be making a crap ton of money. It'd be more so to keep me kind of occupied, And if I made a little bit of money, I made a little bit of money, but it would be more so to like keep me active, keep me whatever. And if I made a little bit of money, it'd make me something. And my fear is that if I did retire or left the workforce, I would get lazy. And so I need to figure out things in a routine that would keep me active, whether that would be, doing a podcast on a regular basis or coming up with some sort of newsletter or something that I would have to work at pretty regularly. I know managing the properties and doing more hands-on stuff with that, because we pay people to do a lot of that now. But my hope would be to grow some of that, just to, because at this point, it's not really for me. My stock portfolio is enough for me to kind of live off of. It's more to try to help other people in my family, because like I have friends and others. Thanks, Doug. You're the man, dude. I appreciate you. That also are trying to get to where I'm at. They're aspiring. They see me, and they're aspiring. So to me, it's almost like I'm trying to help them. And even if it drags me behind, like you stated, it's like, it's about bringing others with me at this point, like how fun is it to try to get to fucking $50 million if you're there by yourself? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
And I could see a path where it's just like, I isolate from everybody. I get to 50 million. And then I'm like, okay, cool. What do I do? Nobody else is there with me.
Yeah.
How fun is that? Not really.
Yeah, and I think that's the best part about doing all this YouTube stuff. I got to meet you guys. Like, I spoke to Adam Bergman the other day. He's doing really well for himself. Like, now the goal is, hey, hang out with people. Like, now I have the ability to, like, hey, Matt, you know what? I'm coming next weekend to chill with you. I could do it, because now I've got that financial freedom to do that. I can take the time off to go to like Robinhood Summit and stuff like that. I think that is something like the next phase of growth for me is that I'm looking forward to. I told my wife too. I was like, it would have been nice for you to be at Robinhood Summit as well, because I could have gone to a conference, you could have chilled, we could have got dinner at a nice restaurant. So it's a matter of perspective on what you want to do. So yeah. Spencer. She's like, oh, I don't know if it's a she, by the way. I don't know if Spencer's a girl, but Spencer's like doing OnlyFans. Like, I'm sure that the short Indian male, pudgy, hairy budget is I'm sure that there's tons of girls looking for that.
There's a market.
I could corner it. I could be the first and corner it.
Could be you, man. Could be you.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the people talking about my health. I am taking that into account. I'm doing better with that. So appreciate people thinking about me.
I've lost ever since we went to Mexico. I've lost actually an additional 15 pounds since then.
I know, man. When you got on stream on Tuesday, I was like, "What the hell is this guy eating or what?"
No,
So-
I'm losing the weight, man. It's good. It feels good. Sleep better. You know, like the emotional state is good. I'm a lot less stressed out. Like next goal is just to get back into like Army strong mode. I'm thinking about eventually doing a 5K, 10K, and then the only thing is like doing the runs. I don't want to mess up my knees, you know. So, yeah.
Very good. All right. Well, I do have to run, but it was good catching up with you. We will. I don't know if we'll have to chat off stream if we ever decide to do a Sunday, but for now, I think we're going to try to aim for Tuesdays, Thursdays. Yeah, for now. So you guys rock.
Yep.
Thank you so
Take
much.
care, guys. It was a
Yep.
pleasure.